What is up, A-Pushers?
Today we will be reviewing the challenges of the 21st century, key concept 9.6. I'm Sabrina.
And I'm Max, so buckle up and get ready for the ride. The 21st century came to a start with the election of 2000. George W. Bush, nominated for the Republican Party, went head-to-head with Al Gore representing the Democratic Party.
George Bush won the election of 2000 with 5 more electoral votes than Gore. In the early 1990s, there was a presence of anti-Americanism from the Middle East who felt violated, especially after the Gulf War when U.S. troops were stationed. Osama bin Laden and supporters of al-Qaeda wanted to restore the Islamic Caliphate and were successful in recruiting many extremists. In 1993, the World Trade Center in New York City was bombed and 6 people died. This was the first time Islamic extremists acted on the threats they previously posed. 5 years later, in 1998, the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania were bombed. After the bombings in 1998, the U.S. bombed al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan and Sudan. They also were able to identify the asymmetric warfare that the terrorists used, which is conflict between groups that have very different military power or strategies.
The most severe terrorist attack in U.S. history occurred under Bush's administration and was the hijacking of 4 commercial U.S. planes on September 11, 2001. The attacks were committed by al-Qaeda under the leadership of Osama bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders. In this attack, commercial planes were hijacked by members of al-Qaeda. 2 of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. The 3rd plane was hijacked and flown into the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C., and the last plane crashed in the field in Pennsylvania. This terrorist attack cost the lives of about 3,000 people and ignited the fire about anti-terrorism initiatives in the U.S. This attack left a jarring impact on the lives of the American people, similar to that of the impact Pearl Harbor had. President Bush demanded for Osama bin Laden and the other al-Qaeda leaders because of their role in the 9/11 attacks on American soil. The Taliban refused to turn in bin Laden and his affiliates. Their government was overthrown by a combination of bombings, U.S. Special Forces, and Afghan troops who were a part of the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance. As a result of the 9/11 attacks, many Americans understood the necessity of background checks and airport searches. Congress passed the Patriots Act of 2001 that gave more power to the U.S. government to obtain information and expand their surveillance and arrest powers. On top of that, people were plagued with wiretaps, collections of phone and records and calls, and imprisonment of suspects indefinitely. On top of all these new regulations, the Bush administration established the Department of Homeland Security, where they included federal agencies, which included the Secret Service, the Coast Guard, and Customs and Immigration.
Bush was involved in foreign policy for several aspects, such as his work with European nations to expand the European Union and NATO, his support for China's admission to the World Trade Organization, and help with conflicts between India and Pakistan. Bush entered his presidency with no foreign policy experience, and some critics questioned whether his administration actually valued cooperation with other nations. His administration refused to join the Kyoto Accord to prevent global warming, walked out of a UN conference about racism, left the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty with Russia, and did not negotiate with North Korea or Iran for years. The Bush Doctrine was used to depict Bush's idea that the old policies of containment and deterrence weren't effective anymore amidst all the racism.
President Bush outright called Iraq, North Korea, and Iran out on his 2002 State of the Union address. He labeled these countries as axes of evil. These countries had no direct correlation with the 9/11 attacks, but the Bush administration was persistent on preventing something before it started. They believed that Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi leader, had the ability to build and distribute nuclear and biological weapons to terrorists. The Secretary of State, Powell, negotiated with the UN Security Council an inspection plan which Iraq agreed to. In the next month, the UN inspectors didn't find any nuclear or biological weapons in Iraq, but the Bush administration was still convinced. In 2003, Bush called Iraq out once again and accused them of not complying with numerous UN resolutions. Because of this violation, the U.S. launched air attacks on Iraq on March 19th without the support of the UN Security Council. The U.S. Armed Forces received the support of the British and other allies, in which they overran the Iraqi force and captured the capital city, Baghdad. This all resulted in the eradication of Saddam Hussein's dictatorship. There was no evidence found by the U.S. armed forces that Iraq had any possession of nuclear or biological warfare. This resulted in the criticism of the necessity of the war and labeled this war by many as the war of choice. The Iraq War lasted 8 years, from March 20, 2003 to December 18, 2011. Throughout the war, Iraq was beginning to reconstruct themselves in 2005, where they held their first elections, created a national assembly, and selected a prime minister and a cabinet. But the war violence continued.
In the election of 2004, the Democrats selected Senator John Kerry and were hoping they could get rid of President Bush, who prompted an unpopular war and limited economic recovery. The Republican Party was its strongest since the 1920s, and Bush won with 51% of the popular vote and 34 more electoral votes than Kerry. From 2002 to 2007, there was a housing boom caused by speculators who borrowed subprime mortgages, loans given because of poor credit history, and fixed up properties for profit. Wall Street put these loans into investments at a high risk. Soon, however, housing prices started falling, causing an increase in foreclosures, loss of value of many investments, and panic among banks and financial institutions. Banks didn't have funds and could not make loans to businesses, known as a liquidity crisis. In addition to foreclosures and the value of investments decreasing, gas prices rose, the stock market declined by more than 40%, and there was a huge rise in unemployment. The federal government tried a $170 billion stimulus package and took over financial institutions like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This did not end the crisis, and more had to be done to revive the economy.
The election of 2008 was a lengthy battle between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary. Obama was an African-American senator from Illinois, and Clinton was the former First Lady. Barack Obama won the primary and selected Joseph Biden to be his vice president. President Obama wins! Obama wasn't really leading in the polls, but he advocated for a change due to the economic crisis that was happening at this time. Obama won with 264 electoral votes to McCain's 174. He would serve 2 terms from 2008 to 2016. Obama's administration passed numerous policies to reverse the actions of Bush and his administration. This consisted of banning torture by requiring that Army Field Manual be used as a guide for interrogation on foreign suspects. Obama was also expanding stem cell research and ended restrictions on federal funding on overseas health organizations. The most well-known and first piece of legislation passed by Obama administration was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act that strengthened protections for equal pay for women. These are just some of the numerous policies that Obama's administration passed that changed life in America for the better. Among these policies, the most well-known and facilitated change was economic stimulus, improvements on healthcare, climate change, LGBTQ rights, gun violence, and immigrants. The Great Recession started in 2007 at the end of Bush's presidency and was passed on to President Obama. The stock market lost its value by half and employment reached a peak at 10%. Obama's administration utilized a Keynesian economic idea in order to avoid a Greater Depression. The Democrats enacted numerous programs to promote recovery and reform. These acts consisted of American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 that provided a $787 billion economic stimulus package which was designed to keep and save jobs. This included tax cuts to stimulate spending and help for state and local governments to keep their employees. The U.S. healthcare was one of the most expensive in the world. It was seen to promote innovation, yet it left many families without insurance. Obama passed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010 that was aimed to extend affordable healthcare insurance to an additional 225 million Americans with combination of subsidies, mandates, insurance exchanges, and expansion of Medicaid. The act was made illegal for insurance companies to deny patients based on pre-existing conditions and allow children to be on their parents' insurance until the age of 26. The gay rights movement gained momentum during Obama's presidency. In 2009, the first protective law passed in support of the LGBTQ community was where Congress made it a federal crime to assault someone because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. In the following year, Congress repealed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell to end discrimination against gays and lesbians in the military. In 2012, Obama came out in support of equal rights marriages, and in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act was unconstitutional with a ruling of 5-4. Within the following years, in 2005, the Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell versus Hodges that the 14th Amendment protected the rights of same-sex couples to marry. Obama and his administration had the same success with immigration as Bush. The most notable actions was in 2012 when Obama took an executive order to protect undocumented children known as Dreamers and allowed them to finish their education and apply for work permits. This program was extremely controversial and the administration received harsh criticism. In efforts to expand the program in 2014, it was halted due to the numerous lawsuits from states.
Part of the reason that Obama was elected in 2008 was because he opposed the Iraq War and promised that overseas decisions would not be unilateral under his administration. The U.S. military supported help for Iraq against the Sunni and al-Qaeda. The last U.S. forces were withdrawn in 2011 and almost 4,500 U.S. soldiers died in Iraq. Once the U.S. left, however, the Sunni and al-Qaeda continued attacking Iraq's majority Shiite government. Obama criticized the Bush administration for not interfering with Afghanistan, and since a large priority for Obama was to fight the Taliban and al-Qaeda, by 2010, almost 50,000 troops were deployed to Afghanistan. The increase in attacks on terrorists in Pakistan increased anger against the U.S. In 2011, Osama bin Laden, leader of al-Qaeda, was killed in Pakistan in an operation conducted by the CIA and Navy SEALs. Now that the leader of al-Qaeda was killed, Obama and the president of Afghanistan signed a partnership agreement and the U.S. forces would train the Afghanistan army. Obama continued to show his desire to restore relations between the Islamic world and the U.S. when he went to Egypt and gave a speech calling for a new beginning. There were several protests across the Middle East and in North Africa from people who were anti-government, specifically their local ones. Many of the protests got violent and were extremely chaotic, and Obama tried mediating the conflict and interfering to help the situation. Over time, the division between the Sunni and Shiite Muslims grew larger, and in failed states like Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Yemen, terrorist groups arose. ISIS was established in Iraq and Syria, a group that wanted to establish a worldwide caliphate under Islamic law. Obama used air power and trainers to help Iraq soldiers stop ISIS rather than sending Americans.
In the election of 2016, the Republican candidate Donald J. Trump was running against the former First Lady Hillary Clinton.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.